The movie starts by chronicling the events of July 19, 1936, when a state of war was declared in the state of Salamanca, Spain. Armed and uniformed officers swarm the city to declare war, which they hope can successfully spread through the whole of Spain. List rules, mainly one that forbids gathering in large groups in public and one that forces surrendering of firearms, that the residents ought to obey to avoid imprisonment. Moments later, a group of soldiers barges into the mayor, Castro Prieto's house, arrest and take him away as his helpless wife watches. Mrs. Prieto runs after the soldiers demanding to know her husband's charges, but is shoved and thrown aside. On the other side of town, revered author Don Miguel de Unamuno is informed of the new situation in the city and rushes out despite his daughter's and his grandson's resistance. He meets up with his longtime friends, Pastor Adelano Martin, and his once student-turned-colleague, literature professor Salvador Hernandez. They discuss the war at length while having coffee at their nearby cafe. During their discussion, it's revealed that, to the shock of his friends, Don Miguel supports the war, as he strongly believes it's the best and only way for the future of Spain. Don Miguel then leaves his friends to go to his office at the University of Salamanca and take an interview from the press over the phone. In the interview, he shows his full and unwavering support for the uprising. During the call, Mrs. Prieto manages to get past Ramos, Don Miguel's assistant, and barges into his office to desperately beg Don Miguel to help her free her husband, whose only crime is being a socialist and a mayor at the wrong time. Don Miguel hears her out and reminds her how he warned everyone that this would happen. He then calmly explains that there's nothing he can do and offers her money to help with her family's expenses until her husband is released. She furiously rejects it and walks out, sharing her doubt of her husband's safe release, and highlights the author's ignorance by declaring that he can't possibly understand what she's going through unless something similar happened to his own family. Meanwhile, a German delegation went to the Spanish Protectorate of Morocco to speak to General Francisco Franco to ensure the Spanish could name a new leader following the death of General José Sanjurjo, and warn that Hitler would withdraw his support if they didn't. General Francisco, to the dismay of the German generals, maintains that the military junta in Burgos will exercise military leadership and send the Germans on their way back. Back in Salamanca, a series of shots are heard at the break of dawn. Don Miguel tries to find out what's going on but couldn't. Then at breakfast, Don Miguel is sad to read in the newspaper that he has been dismissed from his position as the lifelong president of the University of Salamanca as a result of his support of the coup by the disintegrating government. Later in the morning, he packs up his things from his office and goes to meet with his friends. They go on a walk while discussing the significance and consequences of the war. Salvador, who strongly opposes the uprising and labels it as just another fascist movement, informs the group that Mayor Castro has been executed. Don Miguel is disheartened and tries to make sense of the news. Then, as their discussion goes on, Atalano and Don Miguel get into a heated argument that leads the pastor to storm off on his own. In the afternoon, Don Miguel goes to Atalano's house to apologize and set a get-together for the next day, but learns that Atalano's not there. He leaves a message with Atalano's wife, Enriqueta, and returns home. In Morocco, the founder of the Spanish Legion, General José Milanastre, travels to the army base to meet with General Francesco. As the two discuss their shared goal and strategize ways to keep the communists in check while making sure the uprising succeeds, General José proposes that the first order of business should be for General Francesco to take charge of the rebellion, but General Francesco declines, reasoning that he doesn't have enough support. Back in Salamanca, Don Miguel is reinstated to his prestigious position at the university by the military junta, who was impressed by Don's public support for them. However, there's a catch, of course. Don Miguel, upon his return to his office, learns that the junta now wants him to be the president of the regional purging committee and to regularly write manifestos supporting their movement. Don Miguel is outraged and tells Ramos to discard the perjury reports, claiming that he runs an education institute and not a judiciary one, despite Ramos's plea to cooperate for the sake of peacekeeping. Later that day, Don Miguel goes to Atalano's house to check on him and invite him out to coffee like he often does. There, he is shocked and terrified to learn that Atalano has been missing for a few days and that Enriqueta has just learned that he has been taken to the city hall for interrogation. Don Miguel rushes to Salvador and informs him of the latest developments. Salvador is very saddened and uses the opportunity to emphasize the grave nature of the movement to Don Miguel. They discuss possible ways to help Atalano, who doesn't have any political ties or any criminal history. So, they decide to start by finding out what his charges are and head to the university to check the perjury reports. Don Miguel and Salvador get to the university and, together with Ramos, go through the perjury reports, hoping to find one on Atalano. Don Miguel finds several reports where people are incarcerated for silly charges that just don't make sense. Then finally, Atalano's report is found, and they learn that he was arrested because he was a Mason back in the day, before he became a pastor. Don Miguel calls Enriqueta Enriqueta to inform her of the charge and explains the Judeo-Masonic Marxist conspiracy that is highly believed by the soldiers of the rebellion, which claims that since the Jews don't have a country of their own, they want to take revenge on everyone else by destroying other nations, and that they plan to accomplish this with the aid of Masons and communists. In Morocco, General Jose passionately proposes to relieve the siege of Alcazar in Toledo, but his colleagues, including General Francesco, refuse, fearing that it would delay their entry into Madrid, which would give Russia time to support the communist government, and that would result in a war that goes on for years. General Jose is dismayed, but insists that if General Francesco took charge, all would work out the way they want. General Francesco refuses once again. The following morning, General Francesco replaces the flag on his headquarters with the old monarchist one, which catches the attention of the military junta in Salamanca. The junta did the same in the city to put up a united front while arranging for a meeting to see what it was all about. General Francesco and his men come to the city for the meeting. Don Miguel is invited to join them. He attends the welcome party to ask the junta for Attilano's case to be revoked. The leader of the junta, General Castellanos, tells him that the case will be reviewed, and this is not the right time to discuss it any further. General Jose pulls Don Miguel aside and warns him to have a manifesto written and sign his name on it. Later, the military junta and General Francesco hold a meeting where they discuss the election of a leader. General Castellanos declares that he prefers the way things used to be done through a junta instead of a single leader and refrains from voting. General Jose argues that General Francisco should take over from the junta and convinces the rest to vote for him. General Francesco has voted in as the leader of the rebellion. On his way back from Salamanca, General Francesco realizes that the military junta still hasn't announced him publicly as their new leader and suspects it's a trap. Back at the university, the administration council led by Don Miguel meets to discuss the manifesto and sign it. Afterward, as Don Miguel leaves the meeting, he runs into Enriqueta, holding her young child, on her way to give him a letter she wrote describing her husband Attilano's innocence. Don Miguel tells her that there's no need to worry and that the case is under revision. She thanks him profusely before she leaves. Don Miguel returns home to find many letters from women in a similar situation as Enriqueta. His daughters urge him to see the rebellion for what it really is instead of what it could be and denounce it publicly. Don Miguel refuses to give up on the dream of a better tomorrow for Spain that can be accomplished through the movement. Elsewhere, General Francesco and General Jose visit a cathedral. General Francesco is inspired by an image of El Cid, a knight also known as the master of the battlefield, who paid a lot of sacrifices for a greater Spain, and decides to send his troops to Alcazar to the shock and disagreement of his subordinates. General Francesco goes through with his plan, despite the resistance, and it pays off greatly. His troops manage to liberate many civilians and soldiers in Toledo, and the general goes down in history as a hero, which also buys him a lot of supporters. The military junta in the city isn't impressed by the popularity of General Francesco. Meanwhile, overwhelmed by the news from Toledo, Don Miguel goes to Salvador's house to invite him for coffee and have their usual stimulating intellectual discussions. Salvador shares that their usual cafe is full of soldiers, so Don Miguel proposes they go for a walk to the countryside. Once there, they discuss how bad the uprising is getting. Leftist Salvador claims that his way of thinking will liberate Spain from all its problems someday, while Don Miguel argues using the "if it could have, it would have happened by now" theory, but not as fiercely as he used to. Later in the afternoon, as they're walking back, a couple of soldiers come and take Salvador for questioning and beat him when he tries to resist. They threaten the old author to turn his back and do nothing until they leave. Completely helpless, Don Miguel watches tearfully as the soldiers take his only friend away. Then, as Don Miguel continues his walk back home, breaks in his mind as he realizes he can no longer give the rebellion and its leaders the benefit of the doubt. It becomes clear that they do not represent the cause and that they're going about it in a completely immoral way. He realizes how wrong he was to have supported them. Then, as he enters his house, he finds Mrs. Prieto waiting for him. She tells the old man how hard it has been to raise kids without her husband. She then swallows her pride and tells him that she now wants to accept the money he offered her a couple of months back. Don Miguel regretfully tells her that he can no longer help her out, which angers her. She tells Don Miguel that his hands are as dirty as those of the rebellion leaders and storms out. Don Miguel falls ill and delirious from the guilt, confusion, and regret as much as anything else. After a few days of bed rest, he recuperates and decides to go to the now Commander-in-Chief Francesco's house to talk to him and appeal to his wife's sense of Christianity about his imprisoned friends and the general wrongdoings. There, he is told that this is the sacrifice the country must make for a better tomorrow, and returns home feeling more dejected. Don Miguel goes to Enriqueta to tell her the news and apologize. The two share an emotional emotional moment. A few days later, General Jose comes to Don Miguel's house to invite him while threatening him to an event being held at the university and organized by the leaders of the rebellion. The next day, Don Miguel leaves his terrified family to attend the party. He is given a seat at the head of the table but declines to give a speech. A few generals give hateful speeches that divide Spain into factions. Don Miguel tunes it all out until he finds the letter Enriqueta gave him that details Atilano's innocence. Inspired by this, he takes his place in front of the podium and gives a passionate and enlightened speech that undermines everything the leaders have stated as it preaches unity. Midway into his speech, the soldiers protest and try to attack him, but Commander Francesco's wife gets him out safely. His family is relieved to have him back safely. In the epilogue, it's revealed that both Atilano and Salvador were executed. Don Miguel was removed from his position at the university and placed under police watch until he died of a heart attack 2 months later, and Commander Francesco ruled Spain until he died in 1975. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.